Folks, my name's Terry Eckel. I was appointed by Judge Fabiano to represent the sheriff pursuant to the request of the state's attorney's office back in October of 2018, when it was acknowledged that there was a conflict in for the state's attorney to represent both the county board and Gary, because there was a dispute over the 2018 budget. Before I get started talking about what the nature of our lawsuit is, I'd like to introduce some law enforcement officials from around the state of Illinois who have come here today in support of Gary. There is Sheriff Dave Schneider from Stevenson County, his Chief Deputy, Mark Marty. There is Brian Van Bickel, the Sheriff of Ogle County, and Tony Christensen, the Sheriff of Livingston County, and you all know Gary, who's to my immediate right. How did this dispute start that has given rise to the lawsuit we filed today? It started in the fall of 2018 when the county board inexplicably decided, in their wisdom or lack thereof, to cut the sheriff's budget excuse me, by $4.3 million, which represented a 13% cut from the prior year. That's when I got appointed to represent Gary. Well, for over a year and a half, we tried to work with the county board. We tried to explain to them what impact these types of cuts would have on public safety. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about public safety. Gary's job as the sheriff of Winnebago County is to protect the people of this county. And the amount of money and the cuts that were being imposed by the county board were going to adversely affect his ability to do his job correctly. We tried to work with the county board, but frankly, it was like talking to a wall. If it was arrogance, if it was just lack of an attempt to understand what was going on, they refused to be reasonable in the funding of the sheriff's department. Gary did everything he could under fiscal 2018 to work within that budget. It's physically impossible to do so. This was at about the same time the county board was arguing with the judiciary over their budget, which ultimately went to court and the county board lost. Gary tremendously supported the judiciary's need for adequate funding. So the judiciary gets cut and the sheriff's office gets cut by the county board. Now let's go to fiscal 2019. In fiscal 2019, the sheriff's office told the county board that to be able to perform his statutory duties, he needed a budget of $32,500,000. There was then a budget meeting on September 27th. At that point, so there's no misunderstanding, from the time Gary became the sheriff in 2014, there were 360 full-time deputies on staff. By 2019, the number was down to 319, a loss of 41 full-time. The number of reserve officers had dropped from 62 down to 1. So we're not talking about the sheriff asking for what would amount to champagne and caviar in a budget. He was asking for what was reasonable and necessary to perform his duties. Well, we get to the budget meeting, and I don't know how many of you attended that meeting, but it was a fiasco. There were oral amendments made to the proposed budget by the chairman, and nobody apparently understood what they were voting on. Recently, I tried to correspond with the state's attorney's office, who represented the county board, to try to get some clarification as to what it was that the county board thought that they passed on September 27th of 2018. And the response I got in writing was, well, there were votes taken and there were oral amendments that were confusing and no one quite understood what they were voting on. So what does our esteemed county board do at that point? They go to the finance committee to supposedly, quote unquote, clarify what the county board had done. And in the process of their clarification, they took the position that if Gary wanted to make any promotions or replace any new hires. If someone left the office and a new person needed to be hired, he had to come back to the county board, get on his knees and beg them for the additional funds to be able to make those promotions. In other words, they were taking the position he could not make any personnel decisions without their approval. Again, in other words, they were trying to assume internal control over the sheriff's office. That's illegal. Just as funding him at a level which they knew to be $3 million less than what he needed to reasonably run his office was illegal. Yes, the county board has budgetary authority over the sheriff's office, but it's confined by a statute that says they must fund him with reasonable and necessary expenditures so he can perform his 4 statutory duties. They didn't do that, and they knew they didn't do that, that they hadn't funded him adequately, and the same state's attorney's office has admitted that the budget was passed with the full knowledge that Gary had to operate over budget. So again, you've got this county board saying we're going to pass a budget, but we're going to tell the sheriff he can operate over budget if we say that's okay. None of that is proper and lawful, and all of those illegal actions by the county board are part and parcel of the lawsuit we have filed. Main components of the lawsuit are: you didn't fund him adequately, you knew that you didn't fund him adequately, and you're at least $3 million below what he needs to run his department. Second, you cannot impose conditions on the sheriff that require you to go back to the county board to promote or hire. That is interfering with the internal operations of the sheriff's office. That is illegal. The third component of the lawsuit is this argument that we've heard from the county board: we don't have the money. Frankly, that's BS. There's something called the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund that was passed, I believe it was 2002, that's bringing in approximately $30 million a year. That money is supposed to be used for public safety, law enforcement purposes. Part of our lawsuit asks that there be an accounting for the last 10 years of how the Winnebago County Board has spent that money, because we have evidence they have spent it on such inappropriate things as grass cutting and painting and window treatment and other expenditures that are not directly related to law enforcement and public safety. And there is currently, we believe, in excess of $10 million sitting in that account, which could be used to properly fund the sheriff's office. And the county board, in their arrogance, just doesn't want to do that. They want to continue to decimate the sheriff's office. They want to eliminate the patrol division. There are 24 deputies for whom the county board has deliberately not funded and said, well, we might fund that down the road if you do everything we tell you to do. Well, that's 24 deputies that are needed to patrol the highways and the roads of Winnebago County. We see it every day. There's people getting killed on the highway. There is crime committed in the unincorporated areas. But your county board wants to eliminate the patrol division. Doesn't want to fund 24 deputies whose primary function is to patrol the streets of Winnebago County and make it safe for the people who live here. So among other things, we're asking for an accounting of the public safety sales tax money to see whether it's being spent appropriately. We don't think it is. And if it isn't being spent appropriately, we'll ask for appropriate relief from the court. Lawsuit was filed this morning, and we will move as quickly as humanly possible to get resolution of the various issues, because there is a degree of urgency involved. At some point, the sheriff's going to run out of money, and when that happens, the safety of this community is going to be at stake. So I'd be happy to answer any questions. I've made copies of the complaint for all of you to take with you. You know, there's a lot of legalese in there, things that mandamus and things like that, that really what you need to know is we want the court to order the county board to fund the sheriff appropriately. We want the court to order the county board to stay out of the internal day-to-day operations of the sheriff's office. And we want a complete accounting for the way they've spent the public safety sales tax over the last 10 years.
So Terry and Gary, the fiscal year started October 1, it's now late March, so we're 5 months in. When is your best estimate of when you do run out of money, or might run out of money?
You know, I would estimate we're talking about, in all likelihood, around June or July, Isaac. But there are people who are probably better suited than me to make that actual estimate. We're running as bare bones as we can. We're in a position where we need to make some promotions, which we're holding back on. We need to replace some employees, and we do not intend to go to the county board to ask them permission to do those things. But it looks to me like June, July is when we'll run out of money.
Those two, speaking of promotions, those 2 detectives and those 2 sergeants, were those promotions made?
They have not been made, and I had asked Gary to hold off until after we filed the lawsuit, but we intend to make those very shortly.
You mentioned that the board wants to eliminate the patrol division.
Right.
Do you know why?
I think it's ignorance, frankly. Floating around last year was this concept, and I don't know if it was coming from Carla Paschal or somebody else who's equally uninformed. They thought that if we eliminate the patrol division, that the neighboring municipalities would assume responsibility for patrolling those unincorporated areas. And of course, that's crazy. They can only patrol if there's an intergovernmental agreement, which is then going to cost the county money. So I think it's the product of pure ignorance on the part of the county board.
Well, how is the county administrator uninformed?
Thinking that made comments to the fact that if the sheriff's office doesn't patrol the unincorporated areas, the adjacent municipalities will take over that function. And that will not and cannot happen.
She's made comments about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's my understanding.
That would cost more if that happened?
In all likelihood, it would. Do you think one of these municipalities that are probably strapped for money are going to go ahead and use their personnel to patrol the unincorporated areas without getting compensated for it? It's not going to happen.
So the chairman and the county board and the treasurer are defendants
Yes.
in this suit. And the timing of this lawsuit is kind of interesting, given what happened last night with the county board, gutting the chairman of some of his powers. Was the timing of this lawsuit the morning after purposeful?
Okay. No, not at all. I've been working, well, first of all, as I said, we have tried over and over again to work with the county board. I have sent multiple letters to Dave Kralinkas, the attorney for the state's attorney's office, who's working with the county board, trying to get cooperation, trying to get them to a position where they can agree to fund us properly and stay out of the business of the sheriff's office so we didn't have to file the lawsuit. And my letters, my most recent letters, have gone unanswered, and for about the last 2 weeks we have been working on preparing this complaint, and has nothing to do with the chairman's issues with the county board at this time.
So you guys are adults, right? The chairman, the county board, the treasurer, all adults. But the longer that this suit goes on, and you're on the job, taxpayers are paying a lot of money to resolve this controversy. So what do all the adults in the room need to do to make this go away?
Well, Isaac, it's a good question. In my 45 years of being a lawyer, I've often thought that if reasonable people could sit in a room together and talk about it and understand their relative positions, and if everybody is trying to do the right thing, you can resolve almost all cases. This one is particularly simple. Okay, we have shown the county board over and over again where their funding's inadequate. And all we've simply said is fund us at a reasonable level so we don't have to lay off 24 patrol deputies, and don't get involved with the day-to-day operations of the sheriff's office, which the county board is prohibited from doing. This could be resolved. It is a simple issue. And although I've been appointed 1.5 years ago, I have held off doing this because I didn't want to have to do it. But we're at a loss right now. The county board, in their arrogance, stubbornness, will not budge on giving us proper funding. If they did, I think it could get worked out very simply.
So you're going to continue in your role as long as this lawsuit goes on, obviously, but help me understand just procedurally, when does your status as a special state's attorney, under what circumstances would that cease?
It's upon court order, and you may, if you've been following this, the state's attorney filed the petition back in October of 2018. The court then appointed me with a specific direction. You know, unlike some special state's attorneys that get involved and get off on tangents, my role was to work with the sheriff and represent him in connection with his dispute over the 2018 budget. Then we got to the fall of 2019, and because the dispute was festering over the 2019 budget, we went back to court, and Judge Fabiano modified my appointment to include the 2019 budget. And if we get to the point down the road where we're arguing about the 2020 budget, then my role would have to be expanded at that point. But at this point, I have the exclusive ability to represent the sheriff in connection with disputes over the 2018 and the 2019 budget.
Okay, so a judge will decide?
Yes.
Is
Mhm.
the answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
And by the way, the statute provides for a process by which I was appointed, which was followed, and then provides for all of my bills have to be submitted to the judge for approval, with a copy going to the county for them to object. And so there is protection to the county in terms of my bill as well. Any other questions?
Caruana, do you want to comment about having the support of your peers here present today?
Just, real quick comment is, I appreciate them coming up and supporting them. It's united in law enforcement, as you can see, the brother and sisterhood, and I appreciate them being here. So, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Our sheriff from Livingston County is Tony Childress, and I apologize for misstating his name.
Going back to the public safety sales tax, you're making accusations that that money was used for things like mowing. Can you provide us with some sort of evidence to back up that claim? Or
Well,
how did you kind of get to that?
yeah,
conclusion?
we've had access to some of the expenditures out of there, and in my complaint, they are listed specifically as to some of the ones that we were able to pick out. But that comes out of records from the county.
The public safety tax was approved by voters to build this very building we're in, right? So
Mhm.
you're painting walls in this building or mowing the grass outside this building. I mean, is that what some of the things you're talking about? Because that would seem to be like a justifiable, what painting where, mowing where?
The purpose of that was crime prevention and detention, okay? Cutting the grass around a courthouse or around a building, it does not constitute crime prevention or detention. And so there are a number of examples, such as what you just mentioned, that in my opinion does not constitute a proper expenditure of the public safety sales tax. Now, the county can come in and they can try to explain why it is, but that's just a couple of examples.
Right, but I'm saying the tax was approved to build this larger jail, right? And
Well-
so if you're painting this building or doing maintenance on this building, that would tie back to the capital purpose of that tax. So what painting where? Like the painting, the wrongful.
Specifically, that ordinance and what was sold to the public is that this money was going to be used for crime prevention and detention. Now, if you want to make the argument that using that fund to redecorate rooms is a proper expenditure, I'd like to, they can make that argument. I don't accept it. And there's all kinds of other examples that are in there. Other questions? Okay, thank you.